It's just past 5 p.m. across India. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you top stories from India and the region. I'm Tanvi Taneja. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in Paris, Ross Cullen. Ross, namaste from New Delhi.
Namaste, Tanvi. It's 12:30 p.m. here in Paris and across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we will be live in Moscow for the latest after the Russian president warned the West over Ukraine, and find out how much the new US aid package for Kiev is worth. But first, here's Tanvi with the headlines.
Russia is technically ready for nuclear war, warns President Putin. Calls Finland and Sweden's entry into NATO a meaningless step.
Only us and the Americans have a triad, and we have advanced much more than them. Our triad and the whole nuclear element is much more modern.
Morocco secures land route to deliver aid to Gaza, uses the Kerem Shalom crossing from Israel for the first time in the 5 months of conflict. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says the country will become a global power in semiconductors, lays foundation of 3 mega semiconductor projects. Our first news from India. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi participated in India's Decade Chips for Viksit Bharat program via video conferencing. The Indian Prime Minister laid the foundation stone of 3 semiconductor projects worth about 1.25 lakh crore rupees, with the goal of development of semiconductors and display manufacturing ecosystems in India. The India Semiconductor Mission has been set up to create an end-to-end semiconductor ecosystem to enable India to lead the global semiconductor industry. The Prime Minister said that today India is the second largest mobile manufacturer in the world. Talking about the National Quantum Mission, Prime Minister Modi said that there is going to be a rapid expansion of the India AI mission. He said that the 3 projects launched today will help in making India a global hub of semiconductor production.
21वीं सदी टेक्नोलॉजी ड्रिवन सेंचुरी है और इलेक्ट्रॉनिक चिप के बिना उसकी कल्पना भी नहीं की जा सकती। मेड इन इंडिया चिप, डिजाइन इन इंडिया चिप भारत को आत्मनिर्भरता की तरफ ले जाने में, आधुनिकता की तरफ ले जाने में ये बहुत बड़ा सामर्थ्य पैदा करेगी। पहली, दूसरी और तीसरी औद्योगिक क्रांति के समय भारत अनेक कारणों से पीछे रह गया था, लेकिन अब भारत इंडस्ट्री 4.0 चौथी औद्योगिक क्रांति के नेतृत्व के इरादे से आत्मविश्वास के साथ आगे बढ़ रहा है।
Prime Minister Modi further said that the day is not far when India will become a global power in semiconductors.
चिप मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सिर्फ एक इंडस्ट्री मात्र नहीं है, ये विकास का वो द्वार खोलती है जो असीम संभावनाओं से भरा हुआ है। इस सेक्टर से न सिर्फ भारत में रोजगार के नए अवसर बनने वाले हैं, बल्कि टेक्नोलॉजिकल एडवांसमेंट्स के क्षेत्र में भी बड़ी प्रगति होने वाली है।
On to the other big story of the day. Russian President Vladimir Putin again gave a nuclear warning to the West, on Wednesday, days before its presidential election. My colleague Ross Cullen is in Paris. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Ross, Putin raising nuclear posture again.
Yes, Tanvi, in a conversation with Russia's RIA state news agency and television, President Vladimir Putin said that Moscow remains in a state of combat readiness and is fully ready to use nuclear weapons if its sovereignty is threatened. However, Russia has not so far used nuclear arms in Ukraine since the conflict began in February 2022.
From the technical point of view, of course, we are ready. The missiles are constantly combat ready. This is firstly. Secondly, and this is accepted by everybody, our nuclear triad is more modern than any other triad. Actually, only us and the Americans have a triad. And we have advanced much more than them. Our triad and the whole nuclear element is much more modern.
Well, the Russian president also said that if US troops appear in Ukraine, Russia will treat them as interventionists.
The United States announced not sending troops to Ukraine. We know what American troops on Russian territory are. They are interventionists. This is how we will treat it, even if they appear on Ukrainian territory. They understand that. I told you that Biden is a representative of the traditional school of politics. That shows.
Well, Didi, India's Dasha Chernyshova joins us now from Moscow. Hi, Dasha. What more did Vladimir Putin have to say about nuclear weapons?
Well, yet again, we've heard from the Russian president about the risk of the nuclear escalation globally. And with that in mind, with the Russian nuclear triad being assured to be more sophisticated than that of the United States, the Russian president said that Russia is always combat ready to this risk, and Moscow is always ready to defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty. So the Russian nuclear weapons, sophisticated and advanced, are there on guard of the Russian interests. We also have heard the Russian president saying that Moscow can hold potentially a nuclear test if the United States resorts to this measure. This is because, according to the Russian president, the US failed to ratify the treaty banning those nuclear tests. So Moscow has also rejected the signature that was earlier put on this treaty by Moscow. The Russian president also was asked about the possibility of using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. He said that the situation was not there. There was no need to do so. He reassured that Moscow does know its responsibilities as a nuclear power. Speaking of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin said that Moscow is still ready for any sort of discussion, but only if the real security guarantees are provided to Moscow, not just the time being bought for the Ukrainian armed forces to replenish their military potential.
Well, President Macron of France said recently that nothing was off the table regarding Western troops on the ground in Ukraine. The Russian president also discussed that issue, didn't he?
Well, that's right. The Russian president said that it is well possible that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, was discussing the possibility of sending NATO troops to Ukraine. He said that could be because France is offended by the very fact that Russia has been advancing in France in terms of cooperation with in Africa, in terms of cooperation with those African countries that was tighter than the cooperation between France and those African countries. He said that while there were good discussions and good relations between him and Emmanuel Macron, they were discussing these issues quite frankly, and Putin said that there is nothing that France should be offended for on Russia, because Moscow was not infringing or was not somehow imposing its interest or its military services by the paramilitary companies to the African nations. He said that was the natural course of the events, and the African nations were choosing for themselves the way they were feeling was more beneficial for them.
Dasha Chernysheva there. Thank you very much for joining us, Dasha Chernysheva, DD India correspondent in Moscow. Well, in other remarks, the Russian President Vladimir Putin called Finland and Sweden's entry into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, a, quote, meaningless step. Vladimir Putin said the country's decision to join NATO was based on purely political considerations and that they wanted to be part of the Western club. Finland joined NATO last year in April, and Sweden became the 32nd country to join NATO last week. Well, the Russian Central Election Commission has decided to extend the voting period for the presidential election to 3 days, from March the 15th to March the 17th, making it the first 3-day presidential election in Russia. And for the first time since 2008, 4 candidates are vying for the presidency. Vladimir Putin said discussions on a government reshuffle could be done after the election results, saying that he deemed the current government to be satisfactory. Well, the United States says it will send a new military aid package to Ukraine worth $300 million. President Joe Biden's administration said on Tuesday it's the first such move in months, as additional funds for Kyiv remain blocked by Republican leaders in Congress.
On behalf of President Biden, I'm announcing an emergency package of security assistance of $300 million worth of weapons and equipment to address some of Ukraine's pressing needs. This emergency package that we're announcing contains a large tranche of artillery rounds and gimlers for the HIMARS. This ammunition will keep Ukraine's guns firing for a period, but only a short period. This package does not displace and should not delay the critical need to pass the bipartisan national security bill.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he was looking forward to the arrival of a new defense package from the United States.
I also want to thank the United States and all Americans who valued freedom for their defense support for Ukraine. I'm looking forward to the arrival of a new defense package.
Well, that's it from me here in Paris. Back to you now, Tanvi, in the studio in Delhi.
Thank you very much, Ross. Ross Cullen joining us all from Paris. Moving on, Pope Francis issued a fresh condemnation of all wars days after suggesting that Ukraine should surrender and negotiate peace with Russia. Pope was criticized both by Ukraine and Western nations for his prior comments. This time, Pope did not specifically mention Ukraine or any other conflict zone, but said all should overcome the madness of war.
I've been given the rosary and gospel of a young soldier who died at the front line. He was praying with it. So many young men, just so many young men go to die. Let us pray to the Lord to give us the grace to overcome this madness of war, which is always a defeat.
Meanwhile, top German politicians also criticized remarks by Pope Francis made earlier this week, calling for Ukraine to negotiate with Russia. We are now joined by DW's Thomas Sparrow from Berlin to discuss these remarks and the possibility of peace negotiations. Thomas, good to have you with us. Why are German politicians so critical of Pope Francis' remarks?
Essentially because they believe that it's not the appropriate moment for negotiations, that it's actually in Russia's hands to take away its troops from Ukraine, and that would bring peace to the situation in Ukraine. Basically, the focus from the German perspective, and not only from the German perspective, but in general, also from some of Germany's closest allies, is that Ukraine has the right to defend itself, and as such, Germany and other Western countries will continue to support militarily. Basically, what they're trying to say with that is that the focus now is not on possible peace negotiations, which could possibly only benefit Russia, but on still helping Ukraine defend itself legitimately from Russia's war of aggression.
And Thomas, has there been any discussions on possible peace negotiations to end the war in Ukraine? What's Germany's position on the matter?
Well, essentially, a negotiation is something that German politicians do view as something that could happen in the end. But it's something that could happen also when both Russia and Ukraine can see eye to eye. In other words, not now in a situation where Ukraine is still defending itself from attacks coming from Russia, where Ukraine still needs ammunition, still needs weapons from Germany, from other countries also around the world. So they do not necessarily see that the moment is appropriate for peace negotiations, and that's the reason why they criticized those remarks by Pope Francis. The question, however, if you look at those remarks, is what impact they will have not only here in Germany, where there's a considerable Catholic population, but also in other parts of the world, Latin America, Africa, where Catholicism certainly plays a very important role. So the question is, on the one hand, to what extent Germany and other countries will continue to support Ukraine politically, economically, militarily, but also whether pressure will grow, for example, in international forums for negotiations to also be considered in a more concrete way. For now, as I say, the focus, at least here in Germany, is not on those negotiations. It is more on helping Ukraine to defend itself from Russia.
Thank you, Thomas. Thomas Sparrow, political correspondent from DW, joining us from Berlin. You're watching DD India Global. Still to come on the show. Nepal's Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dahal Prachanda seeks vote of confidence for the third time. India's President Draupadi Murmu holds delegation-level talks with the Mauritius Prime Minister Pravind Kumar Jugnauth. Several MOUs signed.
Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs, with a fusion of aesthetics and substance. Introducing news in a new avatar. Experience the world through a new lens. Stay tuned to DD India for an exciting journey beyond borders.
Welcome back. You're with us on DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. On the third day of President of India Draupadi Murmu's visit to Mauritius, delegation-level talks were held between India and Mauritius in the National Assembly. The two countries decided to further strengthen their bilateral relationship in the various sectors, including that of financial services, civil services, taxation, and investigating agencies. And 4 MOUs were signed in this regard.
Several important MOUs were exchanged in the presence of Honorable President and the Prime Minister of Mauritius. These MOUs capture various segments of our bilateral cooperation across different domains such as public administration, avoidance of double taxation, financial services, and good governance.
Now, further west in Asia, humanitarian aid from Morocco was sent to Gaza via a land route on Tuesday. This is the first time Kerem Shalom border crossing from Israel has been used for aid in 5 months of the conflict. A shipment of 40 tons of aid was shipped by air to Israel before it was loaded at the crossing onto trucks operated by the Palestinian Red Crescent. Meanwhile, one Palestinian assailant was killed after stabbing 2 Israeli security officers at a checkpoint on the outskirts of Jerusalem. The Israeli police said that the man arrived at the checkpoint by a bicycle and drew a knife and attacked the security officers. The incident comes amid rising violence that has surged since Hamas attack triggered the Israel-Hamas conflict in Gaza. Staying in Asia, Nepal's Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dahal Prachanda secured vote of confidence for the third time. Prime Minister Dahal won 157 votes in favour, while 110 lawmakers stood against the vote of confidence. One of the lawmakers in the Nepali Federal Parliament abstained. A total of 268 votes were cast in Wednesday's vote of confidence tabled by Prime Minister Dahal. The Union Cabinet has approved agreements to strengthen bilateral relationship between India and Bhutan under the leadership of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. An MOU on general supply of petroleum, oil, lubricants, POL and related products was signed between the two nations. An agreement was also inked in the food safety sector. Both nations also approved an MOU on cooperation in the field of energy efficiency and energy conservation measures. And Prime Minister of Bhutan, Tshering Tobgay, will be on an official visit to India from 14th to 18th of March at the invitation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This will be his first overseas visit after assuming office in January 2024. During the visit, the Prime Minister of Bhutan will call on India's President Draupadi Murmu and will also hold bilateral talks with the Prime Minister of India. India's External Affairs Minister and other Indian dignitaries will also call on the Prime Minister of Bhutan. The visit of Bhutanese Prime Minister will provide an opportunity to the two sides to preview the partnership progress. And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world. A massive explosion at a restaurant in northern China on Wednesday killed at least 2 people and left 26 injured. The blast is suspected to have been caused by a gas leak. Rescue work is underway and the injured have been sent to hospital. The Italian government is mulling over a prison crackdown that would make even peaceful protests a criminal offence and could double the jail time of inmates. The move is among a raft of law and order initiatives by Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni ahead of European Parliament elections in June. Japan's Toyota Motors has agreed to give factory workers their biggest pay hike in 25 years with monthly pay increase of as much as $193 besides bonus payments. The bumper pay raises will give Japan's central bank a leeway to make a key policy shift next week. Archaeologists have discovered about 2,000 years old golden coins and artifacts at the Tel Abrak archaeological site in the UAE. Experts believe that the coins are an imitation of the Roman gold coins dating back to 1st century AD. And Japan's Space One's Kairos rocket exploded shortly after its inaugural launch on Wednesday. The 18-meter 4-stage solid-fuel rocket exploded seconds after lifting off from its launch pad on the tip of mountainous Kii Peninsula in western Japan. The explosion left behind a large smoke and a fire near the launch pad on the tip of Kii Peninsula in western Japan. The Tokyo-based startup Space One was aiming to become the first private Japanese firm to put a satellite into orbit. The president of the Japanese firm has stressed that the rocket explosion cause is under investigation. That's it for this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter and Instagram at DD India Live. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.